Okay, well, we're going to get started. I'm hoping I can see when people try to join the meeting if more people come in a little bit late. Thank you for being here. I am Christy Orr. I'm the Director of Disability Resources here on campus. Since we are such a small group, I would love to know if you are new to A&M or new to teaching. That would be wonderful. If you can you can put in the chat or you can unmute and let me know. That would be great. And whether you're starting this semester or did you start in the spring but just went through new faculty orientation. New to A&M College of Nursing. Lovely. Okay. Let's see. Started last week. Perfect. So brand new. And were you teaching somewhere else before?
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. Also, brand new laptop, so learning how it works with Zoom.
Totally understand.
Yes, so I did some adjunct for an asynchronous program at a community college, and I primarily have experience in the hospital setting with clinical education. So, yes, new to academia. I'm just going to pull that card.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, Dr. Chen.
I'm not new. I've been here for more than 30 years.
Oh, you just found out about it and wanted to come,
Yeah,
huh?
well, but anyway, I still want you to just review all these
Love
details,
it.
make sure that I don't make mistakes, right?
Perfect. I know
Okay.
I love it. That's wonderful. So I will kind of tell you a little about how this came about. First of all, I will commensurate with Lindsay. So you may or may not have heard, but there was a small fire in the Student Services building over the weekend. And that's the building where we are housed. It was on the second floor, and we're on the first floor. So we did not have any fire or smoke damage, but we did have water damage to our offices. So I am actually in a totally different setup than I'm used to. So I am in an office, thankfully, and we are able to be in a little bit of our office suite. The good news is that the testing center was not impacted. So that is a huge blessing because that would have been very challenging for us if we did not, if we had to relocate the testing center. So our staff are in private testing rooms in both the Student Services building and our West Campus location, and we're going to just make that work and hopefully they're going to get the repairs done pretty quickly. So I always like to share our mission. The mission of Disability Resources is that our staff members interact and collaborate with faculty, staff, and students to achieve an equitable learning environment at Texas A&M. Big important part for us is that we interact and collaborate. And we intentionally, several years ago now, changed the order to say faculty, staff, and students because faculty really are the most important people we collaborate with. If we can work with you to provide an equitable learning environment, then students have what they need. And so they may not even need accommodations if we can be more inclusive in the teaching style. But even when they do need accommodations, if we are working with you together, that's the best way we can achieve access rather than us trying to make everything happen or take care of everything. It's us working together that actually makes it all work. So, what is a disability? A disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Those activities have been determined through legislation, so the list was very small and it grew over time. That is things like eating, sleeping, breathing, reproducing actually was added to there, taking care of yourself, performing manual tasks, along with things like seeing, hearing, walking. So it is physical or mental impairment impacts a major life activity. The most common disabilities that we see on our campus ADHD, mental health, learning disabilities, health related disabilities. What's important to note about that is those categories are by far the largest numbers of students that we see. So I think health disabilities, last time I looked, there were around 700 students who had health related, so chronic health disabilities. The next lowest categories you get into the maybe hundreds instead of 600, 700. ADHD is the most common disability that we see. And then we have mental health, depression, bipolar disorder, panic disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, all of that category. Learning disabilities would be things like a reading disorder, a disorder of written expression, auditory processing disorder, anything like that. And then we get into health related disabilities, which are chronic health conditions. Those numbers have been on the rise. So things like POTS, if you've heard of that, diabetes, migraines, any kind of chronic, typically episodic conditions, although there can be other things that may impact someone's health. Other disabilities we work with are autism, visual, hearing, physical, orthopedic. We do work with students with temporary conditions. So we approve paratransit for students. We also work with students if they've like maybe broken a hand or an arm and they're not going to be able to write. Also, people with speech impairments. Those are all categories that we work with. Big thing about those top four categories are that they're primarily invisible disabilities. So if a student does not disclose to you, you would not know that they have a disability. And so that's important just because there are times when students are a little bit reluctant to come to us. Maybe they're reluctant to talk to you. And it's important to know that some of those disabilities you wouldn't even know if they didn't tell you. So who we work with on our campus is basically everyone, honestly. The only people we don't work with is we don't work with the law school. We don't work with pharmacy students in Kingsville, but we work with everyone else. So we work with the professional students, which includes the College of Nursing, since we just talked about that. We work with medical students. We work with dentistry in Dallas. We work with our engineering academies that are spread out throughout the state. We work with McAllen students. We work with Galveston students. We work with all the undergraduates here in College Station, as well as all the graduate students here in College Station. We also work with the InMed program and the City Center program in Houston, as well as the Washington, D.C. campus. So, although our offices are here in College Station, we actually work with people throughout the state and then even in Washington, D.C. And I think this is less something I need to point out now, but used to be people thought when you thought the word disability, you thought deaf, blind, wheelchair user. But now we know that we have students with all kinds of disabilities and they're involved in all kinds of campus life. So we have honor students, undergrads, grads, and professionals, as I talked about before, students that are in the Corps of Cadets, international students. So every person on campus, every student on campus could be a person with a disability. And again, with so many invisible disabilities, you wouldn't know unless they told you. We also work with students who have lifelong conditions, as well as students who acquire their disability while they're here or maybe even in high school. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it. If you think about marginalized populations, students with disabilities or people with disabilities is the only group that you could join at any point in your life. And if you live long enough, you probably will develop a disability at some point or another. So it is a little bit different than when you think about other groups of students that we might serve. So we do have a fair number of students who either didn't know they had a disability till they were in college and they were diagnosed then, or they acquire something. So mental health, a lot of times student people will be diagnosed with a mental health condition between the ages of like 22 and 26. So that is looking at some of our college age population. They actually are diagnosed when they're in college. Maybe they didn't have it earlier, or maybe they weren't diagnosed. And then of course chronic health conditions, some of those can be triggered by different things and maybe developing while they're in college. So, none of us ever know if we may develop a disability at some point. And so we really want to work as a university to make sure we're providing as equitable of a learning environment as we can. So, things to know, students do have to identify to our office. So, when you're in K through 12, the schools have a responsibility to find those students who have a disability. It's called child find. They're supposed to identify them and diagnose them. When you get to higher ed, it is the student's responsibility to know that they have a disability. So maybe they suspect something, they get tested, they get diagnosed, and then they let us know that they have a disability. So they have to let us know that they have a condition that might be a disability, and they have to ask for accommodation. So, what is it that they need? And then they have to provide appropriate documentation, which they have to pay for, although we have some ways that we can potentially help them if they need help in order to ask for the disability. And then they have to notify us if the disability is ineffective or it's not being provided by their faculty member. There's all different ways that students can get diagnosed with a disability. It really depends on what the disability is based on, if it is a physical condition, if it's a learning disability. If a student thinks that they have a disability but they're not sure, they can be referred to our office and we can help them with what resources are available for them to find out if they have a disability or not. And there could potentially be some funding that might help them if that is a concern. Does anyone have questions about kind of the student's responsibility there? Feel free to put questions in the chat or unmute at any point if you would like to do that. Okay, I'm going to move on. So disability resources responsibilities are that we are responsible for verifying that the student has a disability. So the student provides the information to us, we review it, we make sure that it is legitimate documentation, that it meets our documentation requirements. We determine reasonable accommodations, and we do work with the student to determine that. So we talk to the student, find out what have they used before? What do they think might be helpful? What are the barriers that they are experiencing or they anticipate experiencing? And then how can we figure out how we could accommodate that? We also problem solve with students or instructors if things are not working. So, or with an instructor, maybe they have a way of teaching and they're just not sure how to accommodate based on that. Then we will work with the instructor to try to figure out ways that will make it work that meet the needs of the class and meet the needs of the student. And then we also maintain confidentiality. So when a student is connected with our office, all of their documentation and their records related to that are held within our office. So those do not become part of their student record. They are held just within our office. And if a student does not ever disclose to a particular faculty member or to an administrator, then that person wouldn't have access to know that. So probably what you're more interested in is what are the instructor responsibilities? Instructors are responsible for implementing accommodations in a timely manner. They are responsible for contacting our office if they need assistance. So if you get an accommodation letter and you just don't know what to do, you're not sure what it means, you can contact our office and we will help with that. You are responsible for respecting the student's desire for confidentiality, which sounds easy, but it can get a little bit more challenging, especially when you get into professional programs or graduate programs, places where maybe it's a small group of faculty members and a small group of students that you might be working with a student and they're having some challenges and they have a disability and you might want to ask another faculty member, what did you do when they were in your class to accommodate them? That's really not appropriate because you don't know if that student has disclosed to another faculty member or not. So the faculty member is responsible for keeping that information, confidential. If you have questions or concerns, you can definitely reach out to our office for assistance. You can also reach out in your regular chain of command just to, make sure that the confidentiality is held. You are responsible for providing course content in accessible formats, so videos, handouts. There's been a lot of talk about that in the last couple of years because we do have new regulations related to Title II about providing all course information in an accessible format, whether there's a student with a disability or not. So hopefully you've heard about that already. If you were at new faculty orientation, I know you heard about it, but that is important that we do make sure that your course materials are accessible. And there's several offices on campus that can help with that. Refer students to disability resources when necessary. So if they come to you and they are asking for assistance, maybe a student comes to you and they say, I have ADHD, can you give me extra time on my test? The answer is disability resources will help determine that. If you can go to them, they can determine that. Or if a student says, I'm really struggling, I have accommodations, they have accommodations, but they're still struggling, feel free to refer them to our office for us to determine what kind of assistance might be helpful. And then you are responsible for including the ADA syllabus statement on your syllabi. So I know we're pretty good about that here, but I do like to always point that out. So common accommodations that we see, testing accommodations are the most common. That is typically extra time on tests and a reduced distraction environment. So one or the other or both of those. We usually start out here at time and a half is kind of what most students have. Although students who maybe just need a little bit of extra time, we may do 1.25 times, so time and a quarter. If they maybe need more than time and a half, but really not a lot more, we might do 1.75 times. So we are determining how much that is based on their prior history, what their testing says, their documentation, all of that. But we make that determination. But that is what we see most commonly. There are some accommodations for note taking assistance. Sometimes that might involve audio recording a class. It might involve taking pictures of the board. It might involve having a peer note taker, although we don't do that very often anymore. So peer note takers have a little bit gone out of favor for various reasons, but really helping the student to be able to take their own notes in some way or another is really a better way of doing that. So we really work with students on how they can be their own note taker, but using some additional tools like recording and things like that. Text or assignments in alternate formats. Typically, that alternate format is going to be a student being able to listen to their assignments along with reading it or instead of reading it. It could be Braille. We don't do that a lot, although I know we have a student this semester who will be a Braille user, and so we provide that Braille format. Could be something like tactile graphics, which is sort of like Braille, except for it is for things like graphs, or maybe if you're in biology and you have a picture of a plant, Braille will only do so much of that for you. And then actually being able to feel what the image is, what it looks like, is something that we can provide. So we do those things for students. We also have a staff sign language interpreter, and we contract out for other sign language interpreting needs and transcription needs. Transcription is kind of like court reporting. So there'll be a student or an individual provider either in the class or over Zoom who will be typing everything that's said during the class. And the student, either on their laptop or another device, will be listening along or will be reading along while it's being typed. So that would typically be for someone who's deaf or has a hearing impairment. They'll be typing word for word everything that's said, and the student will be able to follow along on their device to see what the instructor is saying. Other common classroom accommodations, I talked a little bit about the note-taking assistants. Sometimes preferential seating or accessible seating, we don't do a lot of that just because most times students can choose their seats. But there are times where students want to be or need to be seated at the back or the front or on an aisle. And so that may be in a letter. Or they need accessible seating. They may need a table at the back of the classroom because of the way the classroom is set up to be able to maybe sit at a wheelchair and have access there. I need to change the term here. It says modified attendance. We now call it plan for absences. So absences, you may or may not be aware, are a huge challenge for across campus, not just for students with disabilities, but students attending class can be challenging. Where we see it come into play for students with disabilities typically is for students with chronic conditions. So primarily health conditions also, although sometimes mental health also. And what we see is that there are students, especially with chronic health conditions, who will have episodes of a flare up, is typically what they call it, of their disability, and they can't go to class. And it doesn't make sense for them to go to a doctor or the health center to get a note. And so they may have this accommodation. So example that I give, because I think it makes sense to a lot of people, is migraines. So if you have a migraine and you are under a doctor's care, you usually know what to do to help mitigate that migraine, which usually involves taking medicine, laying down, sleeping, being in a dark space, whatever it is that works for you. It doesn't involve going to a doctor just to get a doctor's note for them to tell you, yes, you have a migraine that you already knew, and now go home and take your medicine and sleep. So those are times where the student could use their plan for absences and then be able to have that attendance accommodation. We do have what's called the flex plan, and I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. If not, I'll come back to it if I don't have a slide. But the flex plan is the way that we manage the plan for absence accommodation in the system that we use. So I'll get into that in just a little bit. We do sometimes have assistive listening devices that students use. And when that happens, the instructor will need to use a microphone. We highly encourage using a microphone, and if you're in a class of any size at all. I know there's instructors who can speak loudly, but there are students who may even not be registered with our office, but just struggle a little bit with certain accents or with certain ranges of speech. I know as I've gotten older, there's certain times where there's just a certain range where people are talking and I cannot hear them as well. Don't have a hearing impairment, but it's just a struggle. Using a microphone can make it where everyone has access a lot easier. And then I talked about the sign language interpreter. Um, Exam accommodations where I talked about extended time, reduced distraction environment. Some students may need to take breaks during exams, and so that could be an accommodation. Could be for a variety of reasons. It may need because they have a medical condition where they need to go step out to use the restroom or take care of that in some way. Some people just need to take a break. Sometimes it's even at their seat where they just need to stop for a minute, kind of clear their mind, reset, do some deep breathing, things like that. So those could be times that somebody might need to take a break. They might need to take a break to eat or drink during their exam. So in our testing center, we don't allow food into the rooms, and we also only allow water in a clear water bottle. So if they need something else, they may need to step out to do that in an area where we can watch them doing that. Um, they could be using a reader, very, very rare now, or text to speech software, or a scribe or dictation software. And then they may have the need for a computer or specialized hardware or software. So, how it all works, this is kind of why I wanted to do this little Disability Resources 101, is that students will submit an application and documentation. So, that is available on our website, which is just disability.tamu.edu. Well, students will go in, they have just a few questions that they answer, and then they will upload their documentation to go with that. Our access coordinators in our office are the primary people who work directly with students to determine accommodations. And every day, we have people who will look at the documentation. We have two people each day that look at it together and they make a determination about whether the student has the information we need to make those accommodation decisions or not. Once they do that, the student will get an email and it will tell them to schedule an appointment with their access coordinator, or we'll tell them that we need more information so that they get that through their university email. It's important that they're checking that. And then they have that meeting where they talk with the student, determine what accommodations are appropriate. They approve them in the meeting, unless we need to have a larger group look at it. So if a student has an accommodation request that the access coordinator doesn't feel comfortable approving in the meeting, they will bring that to our larger group that meets every Friday morning. We call it our decision review and consultation meeting. And we all meet together and we talk about accommodations for students. We will brainstorm what might be helpful. We'll make determinations on those harder decisions to make, and then we will let the student know. Also, in their initial meeting with the access coordinator, they will teach them how to request letters in our system and send out those letters and schedule their exams if appropriate. And then they sign an e-student forms, expectations form. So that's a form that's within our system. So I keep saying our system. So what is our system? It's called AIM. So you will hear us say AIM all the time, which stands for Accessible Information Management. It is the best of the best as far as the systems that do manage the work that we do. There's probably only maybe 4 or 5 different data management systems that are used for our work. And this is the one that really is the most comprehensive. So we're super happy we're able to use it. There's a student portal, there's a disability resources staff portal, and there's a faculty portal. So prior to us using this system that we started several years ago, we had no faculty portal, and that has been a game changer for the work that you guys do. It does integrate with Compass, so we pull student information, schedules, their email, all of their information comes from AIM. Their instructors all are from Compass. And we use it for managing exams. That's the reason we really wanted to go to AIM, because it works really well for that, for note taking, for equipment checkout, for our case management on our side. So it does all of that for us. We moved last year to a multi-campus module, which means that we can support all of our offsite locations. So, and that does include the law school. So the law school uses AIM even though we don't work directly with those students. And then I should have changed this. We actually moved to a new version in May. So we're not moving to it. We already did move to it. And it has a more user-friendly interface. We actually moved last May. And there's some efficiencies with testing. So they are continually updating and changing AIM to make it where it works better for us. So, oh, whoops. So, testing center. We have two testing centers. So, this is a change as of last year. We have a student services building testing center, which is here in our building. Thankfully, the fire that we had that I mentioned did not impact the testing center, which was a huge relief for us. That would have been really hard to relocate. And then we have a testing center in the West Campus Library in Suite 125. The reason we opened the West Campus Library Testing Center is because of space needs. So we had, probably before we opened the second testing center, we had the largest testing center in the country, and now we've more than doubled the size, which I think is maybe a point of pride, and also I'm not so sure. But we think that means that faculty trusts us to provide the accommodations for them. And we make it easy for faculty because we've got that space so that students can get the accommodations that they need. It is only for students registered with disability resources. So we get asked sometimes, can you provide makeup exams for other students? Can you do any kind of other testing? And really just because of the needs that we have as far as the space and the staffing to run the testing centers, we are not able to do anything besides the accommodated testing. Faculty members don't have to use a testing center, so they can accommodate themselves as long as they're able to provide the accommodations. And I will say, just knowing that Lindsay shared that she's in the College of Nursing, we do not provide tests for nursing or any locations that are not here in Bryan College Station, obviously. But nursing, the vet school, the medical school, pharmacy, I think that's it. They all provide accommodations on site. Part of that is just because of students having to come to main campus and figure out parking and all of that really doesn't make sense, and the travel time to get from one to the other. So they provide the accommodations in those spaces. So some of what I'm saying does not apply necessarily if you are not on main campus. But our rules are that students have to schedule their exams at least 5 business days in advance of their test. And then for final exams, it's about 3 weeks. Hopefully, I think this semester it's a little bit shorter. We're trying not to need students to schedule quite so early, but because of our procedures and how long it takes for us to get the rooms planned and make sure that every student has a seat, it just takes us a while to plan final exams. We give final exams in our two testing centers and in the Memorial Student Center, so the MSC that's right by our building, this basically our student union. We reserve about 11 rooms there, and we run those all with volunteer proctors and then some of our staff. So we have over 100 proctors that help us out during final exams. So it's a huge production for us to give final exams in the fall and the spring. So we do have staff, full-time staff that run the testing center, and those staff are testing center, sorry, faculty responsibilities for using the testing center are to complete the testing agreement that's in AIM, to indicate what's allowed on exams, send the exams to the testing center in a timely manner. The testing center would like me to say they have to be turned in 3 days before. I cannot say that because I know that doesn't always happen. And the consequence of not turning it in ahead of time would mean a student doesn't get their accommodations on a test, and I'm not willing to do that. But given the number of exams we give, we really need to get them at least the day before because it gets very challenging if we don't have the exam and the student comes in, or there's changes on the exam because there were mistakes or things like that. We do need instructors to provide the password if it's an online exam with a password. If they're online exams, they do need to set the multiplier, so they need to make sure that that is taken care of. And then making sure that the online exams can be opened at the same time that the student is scheduled. So a student might be taking an exam maybe a little bit early in order to give the exam and then get to their next class in time. If that happens, we need to make sure that the exam can open at that earlier time. So I kind of mentioned this already, but if you are not on the main campus, you should be aware of how that accommodated testing works. And if you don't know, I'm going to give you a list of people that you could check with to find out how that works. So we work from a college model. Access coordinators are assigned to work with each college, and the access coordinators are assigned to work with students based on their college. The access coordinators are responsible for doing at least one presentation per semester to their college, and they meet with our academic liaisons that I'll talk about in just a minute once per semester. So I will send you the slides after this, but you will be able to find there's a link to where the assignments for the access coordinators are on our website. And then all access coordinators work with general engineering, blend team, and general studies. So I'm not going to go through the pictures and names of everyone that I have on the next slides, but I will send you the slides so you will have those so you can identify who your access coordinator is for your office. And so a couple things to know. So challenging accommodations, things that can be challenging, and I adapted this from another presentation. So I'll say we're not going to discuss it right now in future trainings. Plan for absences is one. So we actually have a training tomorrow. If you have a student who has what's called a flex plan for the plan for absences, you got an email letting you know there's a training tomorrow. If you're interested, it's tomorrow at noon. We have 150 instructors signed up right now. So if you're interested, you're welcome to go to that. Students will ask for extensions on assignments. It's very rare for us to provide that just because that doesn't work well in the college environment. And then reference sheets or memory aids. Again, very rare for us to provide that, but there's a process that we go through, and that is more time intensive for our staff and for faculty when we do have that accommodation. Just a quick mention of service animals in case you end up with someone in your class who has a service animal. Service animal has to be a dog or a miniature horse. I hate to say it because it'll happen, but we've never had a request for a miniature horse. So service animals are dogs. Someone cannot come in with a cat and say it's their service animal. That does not meet the definition of a service animal. Service animal has to be trained to perform a specific task to support a person with a disability. And they have to be actively engaged with the student. So if a student says, this is my dog, she comforts me, she's my service animal, that's not accurate because that's not something the animal is actively doing. If they say, this is my service dog, they get between me and other people when it's very loud and very crowded so that way I have some space. That may be a service dog. So there is a difference. It has to be proactively, actively doing something. They can be excluded from places if there's a health and or safety risk. So again, nursing, health center, we make those decisions about a surgery room or a lab. If we're, a lab where there's other animals, where there's cadavers, then we make some decisions there. And we work with usually the faculty member and maybe some administrators in the college or department to figure out if it's appropriate or not to have an animal there. They do not have to register with our office. So someone could have a service animal and not register with our office. It's the law. It's just the way it is. But if they are living on campus, they do have to register with our office so that we go through the proper process for documenting vaccines and some of those things. And we can only ask two questions. If there is a student with a dog, we can say, is the animal a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the animal been trained to do? We cannot say, show me that the animal is trained to do that. For one thing, there are some, they're like diabetic dogs that can sense if someone's blood sugar is high or low. Well, we can't say, show us that they can do that because hopefully the student isn't needing that right then. So we cannot ask for them to show it, but we can say, what task is it that they do? Just a quick, pregnancy accommodations are not provided by our office. They should contact Title IX. So some campuses, they do provide accommodations through the disability office. We don't do it that way here. And then I've got some resources that are listed. Again, I'm going to send this to you. One of the things that is not on here because of where I modified this from, and I will find the website. I'm going to stop sharing. my screen. Okay. Oh, somebody just joined and we're almost done. So I am going to share. Let me find another place that you can contact if you need assistance is your academic liaison. So each department has an academic liaison within your department. So typically it's an associate or assistant department head who has gone through additional training and is aware of our policies, understands how things work, have a connection to our office. And that list is found, I'm going to put it in the chat here. So if you have maybe a question and you would like someone to help you work through a process with our office or just want to know how something works, you're always welcome to contact our office. Again, we have the access coordinator list, so you can contact them and ask them, or you can contact someone in your department. So I encourage you to look and see. Every department should have one. Some have two people that have been identified and trained that can help you if you have questions. But again, you're always welcome to contact our office too. I know I went really fast and slightly scattered just given our, so yes, can you speak to who or what the instructor of record is? The instructor of record is the person listed on Howdy. So when we go into Howdy and Compass, when we pull someone's schedule, the instructor of record is a person whose name is listed there as being the instructor. Good question. Other questions? Like I went fast and I've done this for a really long time, so sometimes I don't think about the very basic. I did have a question, new faculty orientation, so I don't think I said this clearly. Um, what will happen? And well, I guess my question is, has anyone received a letter from a student who has accommodations like yesterday or today?
I didn't receive it from the student, but I did receive it from your office.
From us. Okay, good. So we started, I think yesterday afternoon is when we started sending the letters out. So students were able to start requesting letters much earlier, but we always wait because over the summer we change some language, we make some process changes. So we always kind of wait till we get closer to the semester. So we let students know that they can start sending their letters out. And so they have to request a letter to be sent, and then the letter comes through AIM. So it comes through our accessible management system. Another thing to point out there is that we have a lot of resources on our website. And so I'm going to drop that in the chat too, especially for working with AIM. So we'll have people who say, can I get a list of my students who have accommodations? And the answer is yes, it's in AIM, it's in your portal, so you can find that. Now, right now, that list won't be complete because students can continue to request their letters, which is how they notify you and us that they want accommodations for the semester. So everyone who's already requested their letters, they're being sent out. But they may request them next week, they may request them later, so you will get them as they request them. If you have larger classes, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes when you're getting the letters in. We suggest that students, instructors develop a folder, create a folder and have the letters sent to the folder so you've got them there available for you, but maybe you're not getting them in your general inbox. And then you'll have them accessible. And again, you can also go into AIM and you can find your list. So it's available to you 24/7. So you don't need to call us and say, can you tell me who has double time, who has time and a half, who's using the testing center? All of that is available in the AIM portal. And we have the link that I just put there has a bunch of different information about how to use it. We have screenshots, all of that. We also have available starting yesterday, I believe, we have our testing center staff are available. You can walk in or you can call either of our two testing centers between 8:30 and 11 and 1 and 4:30, I think. And they will help walk you through how to do a testing agreement for your class. So if you have a student or if you have students that are going to use the testing center, you can do that testing agreement and we'll walk you through that process. So it's fairly straightforward, but sometimes the first time you do it, it just would be helpful to actually have some assistance, and we're happy to do that. Any other questions?
This might be, well, I know it's unique to me.
Go ahead.
In the College of Nursing, we use simulation as a form of testing of competencies for our nursing students. And so
Mhm.
when I receive the accommodations for extended time, does that cover any form of testing, including simulation, or what are your thoughts?
So most of this time, students will say they don't need it for simulations. If they say they do, then typically what will happen is that we may need to go through and look task by task and see if it's appropriate or not. So if it is, and we've actually had this specific example, not in nursing, but in another program, where it was like if it is something like suturing, you can't have extra time for that because the longer that the wound is open, the more risk of exposure of contamination germs. I'm probably using all the wrong words, but these are the words that make sense to me. If it is something like writing a case note, well, then maybe extra time would be appropriate because it doesn't matter. So I put the list, a link to the list of access coordinator assignments, but Lindsay Tracy Foreman is your access coordinator who works with you. She's actually one of our associate directors and she works with all of the health sciences. And so you are welcome to contact her even just proactively to say, hey, can we talk a little bit about how simulations have worked? And then have that discussion now, even before the semester starts, and she can tell you what they've done in the past, what she's seen. We're very actively involved with our national organization, so we have connections with other universities who are doing the same thing, and we can contact them and be like, how have you done it? So I think key is really just connecting with Tracy to find out where it's appropriate, where it's not. Most of the time, students are going to say, yeah, I don't need extra time for that. Because the reason I need extra time is really it's because I'm reading and processing and that takes longer. But if I'm actively doing that, that's not where the disability impacts them. But it depends on the disability whether it impacts them in that way or not. So I think big message we've been sending to everyone is contact us. Any question, anything. We are collaborators, we're partners. Let us help you figure out what you need to do.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And Tracy's very familiar with the individual students too. And we can also be sometimes if you're like, I don't know her, I don't know if this would be good or not, or I have concerns, we can be the ones to express to the student, hey, we have concerns about how this will work. And we're not grading them. We have a very different relationship. So it's kind of nice for us to be the ones to ask the question. So you don't feel like they feel like you don't think they can do the work or whatever. We are very experienced in being able to ask those questions in a way that lets them know we know you can do it, but we need to figure out how do we do this in a way that makes sense. Any other questions? Okay, well, I will send out the handouts. I am happy to be a contact. You've got the access coordinator assignments, but also if you just have a question, you're like, I remember she did this presentation. I don't know how this works. I have a question. Please ask. And even, sometimes you get people like, I don't know how to ask this in a way that sounds okay. Everything sounds okay to me. So if you have a question, I assume it's coming from a good place and I want to be someone that helps you and the students. So feel free to contact me if you have questions. I may refer you to somebody else if that's more appropriate, but I'm happy to be a contact person for you. Awesome. Yes, thanks, Lindsay. Sorry, this is the first time we've done this at Disability Resources 101. So I also learned I need to change some slides a little bit more. I probably would have done that yesterday if we wouldn't have had a fire, but I will get it better next time. This, I think, getting information to faculty is so important for us. So I appreciate you coming. Feel free to let me know if you have other questions, and y'all have a great start to your semester. Have a good week before it starts. Thank you so much.